Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we're talking about ENTJ careers. Some people think these two things are synonymous. The ENTJs are all about careers.
Right.
But they have other interests as well. And we're going to talk about careers, though, on today's show. This subject came about during our Personality Life Path Mentorship Program, this career idea for a podcast series, because we've been doing this mentorship where we take the 8 Jungian cognitive functions. These are the mental processes we use as people in our personality types to learn information, make decisions. We take all 8 of those, and we have a group of people going through a mentorship class with us, looking at each one of those functions each week. We look at the archetypical energy that function represents in the world, but also how our relationship, according to our personality type, interfaces with that energy and that function and the people around us. And as we go through the mentorship, people understand how they're attuned, the you are here dot of their life. You're an ENTJ, that's the you are here dot, but where are you going in life? What's your career path? What's your relationship path? What's the path you're going to follow now that you know you're an ENTJ? So that's the mentorship. And in the middle of it, we were noticing people are showing up in transition in their life. They're coming to this program because they're transitioning maybe a lifestyle. They might be in a relationship transition, but I'll tell you, 80% or more of people are in the middle of a career transition of some sort, whether they're just starting out in a new career or they're wanting to alter or change a career trajectory they've been on. So this was coming up so much in that mentorship, we thought, let's do a series on the Personality Hacker Podcast talking about careers related to each of the 16 types. And this week, we're talking about your type, ENTJ, or maybe you have an ENTJ in your life and you're listening along to get to know them a little better. And we're going to talk about it in a principle-based approach today, Antonia, where we're going to go into 4 different flavorings of the ENTJ personality type.
Right. Yeah, we're going to discuss 4 subtypes of how ENTJs can show up. And the reason why we're going that direction is it seems that there is a strong relationship between career choice and the style of our personality type that we show up with. And that makes sense because our career, our job is, ostensibly where we spend at least 40 hours a week. There are certain, very specific problems that need to be solved in that career. There are different environmental considerations depending upon the industry you're in. There are different styles of people you run into. And so the problems you have to solve, the way you have to show up to interface with the other people, the environments you find yourself in, it makes sense that all of this would influence how your brain is being, sort of more subtly wired over years, sometimes decades of life. So the career you choose actually has an impact on your subtype. And your subtype has an influence on the kind of career you're going to be choosing because not every ENTJ is the same. I mean, that seems obvious, but if you were to say, look up, a list of ENTJ careers, it's probably pretty monolithic. And you can't really, paint all ENTJs with the same broad brush. So I think entering into it with a little bit more, so maybe subtlety or nuance, I think is helpful when a person is trying to pick a career path.
I did do a list of ENTJ careers, Antonia, a top 10 list.
Yes, I know.
I did internet research. I have it right here. I can read it on the air if you'd like me to.
Why don't you, Joel?
Okay.
Why don't you read your list?
So this is the top 10 ENTJ careers according to the internet. Number 1, CEO. Surprise, surprise, according to the internet. Number 2, management consultant. 3, entrepreneur. 4, investment banker. 5, marketing manager. 6, military officer. 7, sales manager. 8, financial manager. 9, project manager. The word manager is in here a lot so far. And number 10, judge. So like a judicial career of making judgments based on people's differences or not getting along. That's interesting. This whole list, I think, is pretty stereotypical, though. I think the CEO in the top spot, I don't think surprises many people who've done any small amount of research online around different career options for ENTJs. But then there's not a lot of creative things on here. There's no actor or artist. We know a lot of ENTJs that have careers wildly different than this list.
Yeah, I would say that that's not a bad list. Every one of these episodes in this series that we're doing around type and careers, the list is usually pretty decent because, it's an aggregate of all the people who identify as being ENTJs. And quite honestly, I think sometimes just when somebody is in a managerial or C-level position, I think that they have a tendency to type out as having ENTJ preferences.
Fair enough.
Even if they don't. So I think there is a lot of conflation of those two things. But it's not a bad list. There are certain ENTJ subtypes that very much are attracted to things that are, like leadership positions and managerial positions. But it is unnecessarily limiting. There are different styles of ENTJs that won't find what they're looking for on that list.
So we're going to talk about 4 different subtypes of the ENTJ personality type today. This came from Dr. Dario Nardi doing brain scan research. He had ENTJs come into his laboratory, connect to a brain scan EEG machine. And then he would watch the patterns, the neuropatterns, or they're called neuropatterns, I guess. I don't know what they're called. I'm bearing out my own ignorance here. He'd watch the patterns of the brain show up on the scans, and he would see them cluster into 4 different subtypes. And based on these clusters, he started to notice that career choices were similar among the subtypes. And then he also wove in some of Dr. Helen Fisher's work around neurotransmitters and noticed also that there's some, deference or attraction towards certain neurotransmitters as well. Mm-hmm. So he asked Dr. Victor Galenko, socionics guy from Europe, if he could use his subtype nicknames to talk about these. And so if they sound familiar, they came from Victor. With permission, Dario used them for these to describe the different subtypes for all the types, not just the ENTJ. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about these. Let's jump into these 4. They're called dominant, creative, normalizing, and harmonizing subtypes. They each have character qualities, and we're gonna make this very approachable to people who may be new to type, but also go a layer deeper. Just a quick comment or two at each one of these for people that are into cognitive functions and some deeper elements of type as well.
Right. We want to make this accessible if you're brand new to type, and you very well may be, because looking for career options and diving more into careers is one of their, like when you first get into type, it's one of the most obvious applications.
Yeah.
So you might be very new to type and really just trying to wrap your head around all of this. And we want to be accessible to people at all levels. But there are a lot of people who are type geeks out there. So we'll give a word of warning when we're going to throw a bone to the type geeks around how this all works.
So let's jump into these. Let's talk about the first subtype, the dominant subtype of the ENTJ. What does this subtype look like? What are the characteristics, the careers they might choose, maybe some of the challenges they have, and we can then go a layer deeper.
Yeah. Okay. So the dominant ENTJ is the most, I would say, stereotypical ENTJ. This is the one that would like everything on the list that you read. And it's usually the sort of the picture that comes up in our minds when we think about this type. So some of the qualities and characteristics of this style, the dominant style, is that they're particularly ambitious, they're commanding, they're confident. They are the ones that typically or potentially rise to become institutional directors, political leaders, tycoons of industry. They really enjoy leading other people, and they tend to do it in more traditional domains like healthcare, media, politics, transportation, like things that are already well-established industries. They are good at getting in there and rising to the top. They have a very in-charge style, which is how we think about ENTJs, and so it's unsurprising that they would have some of these characteristics. They are outgoing, tough, analytical. They generally rely on a preset way of rapidly acting on anything that comes up. So they have strong executive skills. They have fast decision-making capacities, and they're really good at getting into action. And so their brain tends to be very efficient. It's almost like there's a bunch of preset switches. And when one of those, sort of brain patterns is necessary, they flip that one on and leaving the other ones off. So unlike other types that might bring in the whole brain to figure any problem out, this type is very efficient with their brain wattage. They're very good at going like, okay, this decision or this situation is going to require like this set of skills or this way of looking at it. So I'm going to flip that one on, give it full wattage, and then when it's done, turn it off. So that efficiency means that there's a bunch of energy to apply to whatever they turn their attention to.
I want to be careful about a distinction here. Are you saying that is different than other personality types? or other subtypes of the ENTJ personality?
It's different than other personality types, right? There is an even higher level of efficiency in brain wattage, or like how one uses the mind, than just about any other personality type. The other type that would probably come close is an ESTJ. But this dominant ENTJ, it's like they figured out how to leverage all of their energy and all of their brain wattage to focus on each problem as it arises and to get into action as fast as possible.
Gotcha. So this is the ENTJ that's most likely your boss. if you're not an ENTJ and you have an ENTJ you report to, most likely this is the ENTJ in your life that's in leadership that you may or may not feel good about, depending on your relationship and the context that you're in that pathway.
Right.
Or if this is you as an ENTJ, this means that you probably are the boss. You're probably the one that's in charge at the top, giving the orders, having things, you say what has to happen, then it goes and happens in the world.
Yeah. And so there can be, if a dominant ENTJ takes the time to learn the skills around it, they can be managers and leaders with great finesse, but not necessarily. The passion for leadership might not translate into finesse. They might just like doing it and want to do it and sort of push themselves into those positions.
Yeah.
And so when an ENTJ is good at it, they're fantastic. They're incredible managers and leaders, and people love them. And when they're not great at it, that's when people get these stereotypes in their head, and when they complain about the ENTJ that was not so nice. But it can actually go either way. The subtype itself does not indicate the level of finesse, just the level of desire around leadership. So some of the positions that they tend to be attracted to are, business management is a big one. You read a list of things that were a lot of business and politically related things, like, a judge is, arguably a political position. But usually the domains they enjoy, so they're looking for leadership, but where? And it's usually things like advertising, the cognitive sciences, economics, education, games, media, and sales. So some more specifics are things like business executive has already been mentioned, but like an ad executive, sales manager, investment banker, hedge fund manager, consultant, and engineering are usually things that are very attractive.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm guessing that this subtype is not going to mistype very often because it's so quote unquote stereotypical of ENTJ.
Yeah. Like when you're pushing for maximum profits while focusing on rapid controlled growth, it's pretty easy to go. That might be somebody with ENTJ preferences.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a layer deeper for someone that's really into cognitive functions and personality type theory and all these things. The neurotransmitter of choice for the dominant ENTJ subtype is testosterone. Mm-hmm. And the two cognitive functions the ENTJ uses is extroverted thinking. We've nicknamed it effectiveness.
This is for the type geeks, by the way.
This is their driver or dominant cognitive function. This is how they make their decisions. What works in the outer world, what gets things done, managing resource. Well, they pair that with their auxiliary or co-pilot function of introverted intuition. We've nicknamed it perspectives. This is getting into somebody else's perspective, shifting perspectives into other people, looking down a long timeline and seeing probabilities, like the intuitive probabilities of something happening or not happening on a longer timeline. Right. And this is something that they use to perceive their world or take in information. And so that makes them intuitive. So these are their two front cognitive functions.
Right.
How are they attuned? Give us the overarching principle of attunement, and then specifically, how are they attuned for the dominant subtype of ENTJ?
All right. The reason why I interrupted you, though, is because I said we'll give people warning when we're going into type geek stuff. So let's make sure that we give people
promised that. I didn't promise that.
Fair enough.
I just seemingly just slid right over there.
You're right. You made no promises. Joel said no expectations. So again, for the type geeks, those two functions, extroverted thinking and introverted intuition, or effectiveness and perspectives, there is an orientation that each of them can have, which is called either analytic or holistic. Analytic is a more assertive, targeted, focused, like sort of almost has blinders on because they're so honed in on a particular way of looking at things through this lens. That's a more analytic version. And then there's also a holistic version, which is a little bit more open-framed, It's not as focused. It's not as targeted. It's not as assertive in its energy. It's just a little bit more like sort of seeing a bigger picture, taking more into consideration. But it tends to be less assertive, so it has less executiveness to it, if that makes sense. For the dominant subtype, and by the way, we recorded a whole podcast with our friend Dr. Dario Nardi talking about how these subtypes work, and we went into analytic and holistic. And if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it all, I highly recommend going and checking out that episode. It's fascinating. But for dominant ENTJs, both their preferred functions, both extroverted thinking effectiveness and introverted intuition or perspectives, they both have an analytic frame. They're both targeted, focused, assertive, and have an energy that's like very like forward movement and directing. And so that's unsurprising that the dominant ENTJ would be so like sort of targeted in almost everything they do.
Yeah, I think the word frame is a great word. Is an analytic oriented function in general would be less open to other people or other energies' frames. Mm-hmm. Their frame is the dominant framework.
Right.
Everybody else needs to match that. Whereas the holistic would be a little more diffused. They're open to other people's way of seeing things, a little more open to the other frames around them.
Yeah.
So more interoperability on the holistic side. So this is probably I don't want to say it this way, but this is the least cooperative ENTJ with others. They would love for you to cooperate with them, but if this is you as an ENTJ, you're probably needing people to get on your bus to do the thing that you've got in mind. You're focused on some goals, some things that you want to do, and you need to organize the troops, organize the resource. Troops, general, quote unquote troops, not literal troops, although those could be the case as well, and get this thing done.
Yeah.
Right? The thing that you see that needs to get done.
Yeah. Dario mentioned that sometimes people see this style of ENTJ even as like villainous because they're so focused and targeted. But at the same time, they also usually make a big impact.
Yeah.
And so this style of ENTJ, their career choice is important, not just for, to match their talents and interests, but also to help them hone some of the skill to bring in a little bit more finesse, a little bit more. Even if you're automating human-centered things, there is a capacity to get more refined at what you're doing. And so career choice is important.
Let's talk about the second ENTJ subtype, the creative ENTJ. What does this subtype look like? What careers do they choose? And maybe what are the challenges they face?
So this ENTJ might actually be mistyping as a perceiver. I wouldn't be surprised if these ENTJs think that they're either ENTPs or maybe even ENFPs. It's a very different style of ENTJ than the dominant. Some of the characteristics is that they're notably curious, they're idealistic, they're fun-loving, they exude a magnetic energy that attracts other people, and they just have an it quality a lot of times. They are, because they're so creative and curious, they have outside the box thinking. They also might, unlike the stereotype of an ENTJ, might not have great prefrontal cortex executive wiring. And what that means is that they might not be good at focusing on the task at hand and making quick decisions about, executive calls. In fact, they might even beat themselves up for being easily distractible or maybe indecisive or lazy, even though they look goal-driven to everybody else. They might be beating themselves up for being too lazy.
Yeah.
And so this is a more chill vibe version of an ENTJ in a career sense. They're not nearly as ambitious, although there's still an ambitious aspect to them. Some of the ways of noticing them or spotting them is that Dario calls them adventurers who travel and act with purpose. Right? So there's a lot of exploring diverse topics, a lot of actual exploring the world, being a true adventurer, being open to new places and new activities and new things. Although they almost always bring a technical and a business mindset to almost everything they do. So even though there is going to be this sense of sort of openness and curiosity, they're still going to figure out ways to get ROI for it. Does that make sense? It's like they're going to figure out a way to build a business model around it.
Oh, yeah.
Or leverage it so that there is a business component to it, even though to everybody else, they might look a little bit more carefree and laissez-faire. There is a way to understand where, opportunities when they arise and making the right connections and doing all the things that they need to do in order to not be a starving artist, so to speak. They like to play with a lot of data and ideas at once. They easily hold an international outlook, right? How things are going to like unfold on a global scale. They have a restless drive for remarkable experiences. So they tend to be very fun and doing a lot of fun things that attract other people's attention. And they also are fairly independent. But because of that weaker executive piece, they usually need somebody to handle some of those details for them. So they do best if they have like an assistant, almost like a handler that's helping them get some of the nitty-gritty handled.
Could we also say, I mean, weaker, I can almost imagine someone with ENTJ preferences doesn't want to feel like their subtype is weak at something. Could we say more diffused than weak as far as executive skills, or is it actually their executive skills are weak?
Well, in comparison to, say, the dominant ENTJ. So whenever we talk about these subtypes, we're still talking about that type. So an ENTJ is going to have better executive skills than, say, other types, regardless of whether or not they fall in the category of the creative, which is a little less than other versions of ENTJs. But they're still going to have better executive skills than other types that don't care, right? And so, I think it's just remember we're talking about it like apples to apples, not apples to oranges.
Agreed. And I think the reason I'm bringing it up too is because we want to talk about capacity, not like we're talking about framing it as weak means it's a capacity issue rather than a attunement issue.
Right. It's kind of a preference issue. It's like if you really enjoy being creative outside the box, exploring, having all these great experiences and not really wanting to be tied down, well, you're not as insistent on tying everything down and making sure everything is like set up exactly the way it should be.
But it doesn't mean you don't have access to that part of yourself. If you wanted to, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, lean into one of these other energies. Let's say you're a creative subtype and you want to become more of a dominant subtype, get better at the executive skills. Mm-hmm. The capacity is available to you as an ENTJ. It just means that maybe you're not attuned to it right now. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
So that's the point I want to make is it's not like you're doomed here. It's like, oh, well, I don't have executive skill. I guess I can't develop that part of me as an ENTJ. No, that's very available to you.
Yeah. And we tried to make this point pretty clear in all these episodes in the series that what's nice about understanding these subtypes is it reminds you that a lot of things are skills that are developed over time, not just intrinsic talents. Like you don't just get bit by a spider and all of a sudden you have superhero powers. It's like in real life you have to work for it. Yeah. And so it's I think this concept of weaker executive skills. I mean, I'm not sure if we're like trying to make sure that we're not insulting an ENTJ out there, but somebody who's a creative ENTJ probably knows this about themselves.
Sure.
They're identifying with that, going like, you're right. My bargain is that I have more freedom and less capacity to, say, take over a company. And I don't really care to do that anyway. So I'm okay with having not the same executive skills as my, say, dominant ENTJ brethren.
But it also works the other way. If I'm a dominant ENTJ and I want to be more creative, I might have to let go of some of that rigor and getting things done in the same way I used to.
Yep, you got
diffuse that a little bit, let that go a little bit better.
Yep.
Or a little bit more. And then that allows me to dip more into that creative side of myself if I'm an ENTJ listening.
Yep.
So anything else we want to cover before we go one layer deeper into the type geek stuff?
Oh, let's talk about the specific careers.
Let's do it.
Okay. So they're usually looking for something that blends business, creativity, a social component, and technical skills. And so because they also tend to have star power, like an it factor, and they are usually pretty naturally charismatic, it's not uncommon for them to put themselves in the public eye. So this style of creative ENTJ is going to, like entrepreneurship is more on the table for them than maybe even the dominant ENTJs can be entrepreneurs too, for sure. But this style is more likely to be attracted to entrepreneurship and be almost like a figurehead there, right? Like the spokesperson for the company that they start. They can also be seen as like social media influencers. That's not uncommon. But you're also going to see them in the arts. You'll see them maybe as television executives or screenwriters even. You'll see them as directors, producers, even actors. ENTJ actors are usually the creative subtype. I know at least two off the top of my head, ENTJ science fiction writers who are most likely creative subtypes.
Yeah.
And things like, they still have good executive capacity, even if it's weaker than their dominant brethren. So you might see them doing things like running special interest conventions. I wouldn't be surprised if the people at the top of, say, Comic-Con are creative ENTJ types. I don't know that to be true. I've never met them, but it's like that's the kind of thing that probably would really appeal.
The comic book guy in The Simpsons. Is he an ENTJ
I am not going to profile
Yeah,
the comic or type the comic book guy in The Simpsons.
You can't profile him because he's not a real person. So you'd only be able to like type him. But yeah, that's how
But he's not running anything. I mean, I guess his comic book shop.
Running the comic book shop.
Yeah, it's true.
Let's go a layer deeper. For type geeks, I'm making a disclaimer now.
Well, and I did say that they might mistype as perceivers, right?
Yes.
As ENTPs or ENFPs. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go one layer deeper. The neurotransmitter of choice is dopamine for creative subtypes, all creative subtypes, not just the creative ENTJ, and the two attunements of the functions. If the dominant has both functions, extroverted thinking effectiveness and introverted intuition perspectives, analytically focused, what about this creative subtype?
So creative subtypes, their perceiving function is the one that is analytic, and the judging function is the one that has holistic preferences. So in this case for ENTJs, it would be introverted intuition or perspectives would be the analytic function. And then the judging function of extroverted thinking or effectiveness, that would be holistic. And that makes sense, right? Having the executive part be a little bit more open framed, a little less insistent on things being a certain way.
Yeah.
That makes sense that they would have less certainty in how to make everything happen and attending to, all the details. Whereas their perceiving function, the intuitive, the creative part of them would be a lot more analytic. It would be maybe even more visionary, more focused on making things in their mind, like something that they've run simulations around or world building or something that's creative inside of themselves, wanting to see that play out in real life, wanting to bring that creativity to the world.
Let's talk about the third subtype of ENTJ, the normalizing ENTJ subtype. What are the characteristics, career choices, and challenges this subtype faces?
So this could also be a subtype that is not uncommon in people's minds, like stereotypically for ENTJs, although this type might mistype as an ESTJ potentially, because they're a little bit better at sort of blending in with the rest of society. They're normalizing. And so they are they enjoy a more settled traditional life. They are usually steady. They have steady jobs. They are usually tapped into community activities. So this is an ENTJ that is like sort of your responsible citizen version of an ENTJ. And they're more sort of chart the course in like Linda Barron's vernacular. They are linear, logical. They have a step-by-step approach to getting tasks done. They have a quiet reliance on their intuition and creativity, with usually a pretty strong concern with how things are going to roll out with human implication. So unlike the dominant subtype that tends to automate anything human oriented and just take over things if they can get away with it, the normalizing is a little bit more tapped into the implications of how these decisions are going to impact people. So that's why they're more tapped into community. They care about how it's all going to roll out for individuals. And because of that, they are more responsible, right? They have like a responsible bent towards all of their sort of what they're going to be doing with their lives.
This might sound like I'm really parsing words, but I just want to know, is it about community or is it about society? Which one is the normalizing more attuned to? Because I know when we talk about the harmonizing, it's all about a lot of people focus. So with this, did you use community deliberately, or is that just the word that came up for you?
Well, I think they're more tapped into general human welfare.
Okay.
And I think the practicality of them probably makes them more community oriented, because that's, it's like you clean up your house first, right? There's like a concern for people, and that's where they can show that concern. So
in my mind, I make a distinction between community is more local and just the people around me, and society is like broader, like more global or national. And you would say this normalizing is more focused on the people in my town, my community, the industry I'm in.
Yeah.
The people in my close proximity.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they might be the ones, and we'll talk about career choice in a moment, but they might be the ones that go into like local politics.
Gotcha.
Right. They are a more introverted version of an ENTJ as well. So they might also believe they have INTJ preferences, possibly even ISTJ preferences. And so they are a more thoughtful version of an ENTJ as a general rule. And they really prefer quiet time whenever they're integrating new information. So instead, like the creative subtype and the dominant subtype, they tend to act faster. Whether or not the creative is acting in a specifically like executive way, it's more like they're just responding to the situation because they're seeking all of those great experiences. So they collate creative ideas much faster. The normalizing ENTJ, when they take in new information, they want to sit with it for a while. Yeah. They really want to understand its implications. They really want to run those simulations, really understand the long game. They're just a lot more reflective and thoughtful about the information that they're parsing out. And of course, that alters the kinds of careers they're going to be attracted to. They won't want something that's going to require fast reaction times from them or really fast responses more than they're comfortable with, because they're going to want to make sure that they're being careful about the information.
Yeah, we're using thoughtful. I mean, I guess you could use it carefully, but we're also using thoughtful, and that's the attunement. And over action, it's thoughtfulness.
Yes, exactly. And so everything in their life is going to reflect this. It's kind of more of they're looking for like sort of calm partners, calm environments, right? Something that's a little bit more steady. The home life is real steady. And but they're still ENTJ, so they're still interested in ENTJ things. So there's going to always be an attraction to like the technical arts, electronics, mechanics, music, those kinds of things, and the social sciences. So anthropology, psychology, these are still going to be interested to ENTJs. They usually are good at holding more traditional jobs and job roles. And so you're going to see them as more general managers than maybe somebody who's like trying to take over, like the CEO position. They're going to be more okay with holding a general manager position because they don't quite have that ambition, in part because they're thinking about the implications of how their actions are rolling out. So they have a little bit more, you can almost call it like impulse control. They usually are found in larger institutions because that's where the most security lives. And so unlike the creative subtype, which is going to be more entrepreneurial, this is a less entrepreneurial style of ENTJ. This is one that's going to look for large institutions that, really can use their talents. So some of the specific jobs they might go for are things like department director in industries like banking, education, energy, medicine, areas that require a lot of patience and maneuvering through regulations, which they're actually pretty good at, and working with sort of the details on how things are impacting people. So almost like the politics of it all, right? Those are all going to be things that attract this type. So like technical managers, researchers in the social sciences, as mentioned, like anthropology or psychology, or maybe even, innovative research projects could probably be very interesting to somebody of this type. Data analyst. Most ENTJs say things like they wouldn't really be good data analysts, but the normalizing ENTJ is actually going to be quite well suited for it compared to maybe some of the other styles. And then anything in mentorship, right? There's that leadership capacity still as an ENTJ. So anything that would fall under the realm of mentor, like a teacher in almost any capacity, or a coach in almost any capacity, or a consultant, right? Somebody who is in a position where they can use the skills that they've developed over a long lifetime and all that thoughtfulness to really help guide other people into not making the same mistakes, or maybe ameliorating the system that they're a part of. Anything that helps them take all of the information that they've compiled over a lifetime of this thoughtfulness and really help other people improve upon their systems.
Yeah, the word that comes up for me is stewardship. It's like you come into something, you ameliorate it, you move it to the next level, you steward it forward. It's not so much, and that's a distinction from maybe the dominant ENTJ, who's all about leadership and get this done and make a mark on this thing, create something like bigger and newer and more developed or whatever. This is more like tweaking and refining, very calibrative and stewardship focused.
Yeah, and usually they have, because their career is a little bit more traditional, they're not, they still have ENTJ preferences, so there's going to be a part of them that's seeking something more meaning-oriented, bigger picture, implication-oriented. So oftentimes they have, even if this is not part of the career, and if you are a normalizing ENTJ, this is something that you might want to take note of. Yeah. There's almost always an interest in something on the side in the arts, or in philosophy, or in spirituality, or in something like kind of that helps them tap into these bigger existential questions and what it all means and one's place in all of it. I think that that's something that normalizing ENTJs need to make sure that they're giving themselves permission to do, and not just have to be a traditional, somebody who does a day job or has even a really impressive career, but also has this component on the side that really fuels their intuition.
Hobbies are super important for this subtype. And let's go a level deeper. The neurotransmitter of choice is serotonin for normalizing subtypes. And so the normalizing ENTJ, serotonin, is what they're focused on. Let's talk about the attunement of those two cognitive functions, effectiveness and perspectives.
So the normalizing subtype is the opposite of the creative. So for the type, the geeks, right? I'm supposed to warn everybody. It means that the judging function is going to be the analytic or have an analytic preference, and the perceiving function will have a holistic preference. So the opposite of the creative.
Yeah.
So in this case, it would be extroverted thinking or effectiveness that is analytic. There is a certainty about how things should be set up. But the intuitive function, introverted intuition, or what we call perspectives, that's the one that's a little bit more open frame. That's the one that's like less certain. It's a little bit more holistic and receiving and thinking about things in a broader way.
Yeah.
Which is why I mentioned if this ENTJ doesn't have that woven into their career, it's going to be a need of theirs to have that intuition nourished in that way, and like the broader spectrum of like I mentioned, existential questions.
So if you're identifying with a normalizing subtype of ENTJ, and we don't have time to unpack this, you can go look up information for this or look into the ENTJ owner's manual to get more data around it. But you are probably the most likely of the four subtypes to enter into what's called a loop and get stuck there. I mean, everybody's going to do that, but avoiding that intuition is probably, this is the type that's going to have to make a deliberate choice to go toward their intuitive function of introverted intuition or perspectives more than the others. Well, that's basically what you're saying. You're saying you got to pick a hobby, something to deliberately put you there, because your job might steer you away from it, is what I hear you saying.
Well, I actually, not to give too much pushback, but I would actually say that the dominant and the creative are more in danger of getting into loops. I would say that the normalizing is more likely to use their intuition exclusively in their career and in their job.
So you're not warning against getting into a loop altogether. You're saying that you might just have one note for your intuition. You need to broaden it, not develop it wholesale.
Right.
Although you might need to do that as well, but broaden it outside of your career.
Yeah. Give yourself permission, because it has that holistic preference. Give your intuition the permission it needs to explore a vast array of intuitive pursuits, which a normalizing subtype might not give themselves permission to do, because that might feel a little woo-woo, or that might feel a little weird or off,
or impractical.
Why would
I do that if it's not related to my career?
Right, but the advantage is that the information that one picks up in a pursuit of art and philosophy and spirituality and all of these bigger questions actually ends up getting funneled back into how they manage and lead people if they're in those positions. Yeah. Like, it helps them sort of see a bigger picture and inspire or motivate other people to take right action.
Let's talk about the fourth subtype for ENTJs. We've talked about the dominant, the creative, the normalizing. Now, the fourth and final subtype for ENTJs is the harmonizing subtype. What are the characteristics and careers of this style of ENTJ?
So this is probably the least stereotypical version of an ENTJ in our mind. Like, we might maybe make a little bit of space for the creative. That's going to feel weird. We're going to think that they're ENTPs or ENFPs. The dominant, we're going to, it's like, that's our stereotype. The normalizing, we're going to go, oh, that person's an ESTJ or maybe has SJ preferences. But this is a subtype that might actually mistype as maybe an ISFP even, or a INFP. Yeah. This is a very different style of ENTJ. Now, as we've gone through all of these episodes, we mentioned that the harmonizing subtype, not always, but the harmonizing subtype tends to be associated with age. Like, the older you get, the more likely you are to explore this part of who you are. So this is a more seasoned, usually, not always, but a more seasoned, mature, maybe even international style of an ENTJ. Some of their characteristics is that they're eccentric, even mystical, highly observant of what's going on, and they can act as superb consultants and counselors. They restructure and rebuild people, which is a very interesting way of looking at it. I actually, I mentioned ISFP or INFP, but actually I bet these are the ENTJs that mistype as INFJs. I bet that's also very common. They usually have a very distinct mode of thinking and acting, meaning each individual one has a very distinctive way of moving through the world that is particular to them as an individual. So it's hard to say the specific skills they've built along the way or picked up along the way because it's very peculiar to that individual. But they usually are refined in the way they think. They've been tweaking their style of thinking and sort of making improvements on themselves for years, if not decades. So whatever it is that they're good at, they're very good at. And so there's a almost uncanny intuitive power that ends up following them. They're usually very tapped into their intuition. Again, might be one of the reasons why they can mistype as INFJs, maybe INTJs as well. They have not great executive capacity, kind of like the creative subtype we mentioned before, in comparison with other ENTJs. They're still going to be ENTJs. It's going to be better than other types, but compared to the other subtypes, it's not as good executive functioning. And they don't have the ability to really act as society expects them to act. So they're very iconoclastic. They're kind of weird, right? Like I mentioned before, eccentric ENTJs. And that's not uncommon for harmonizing subtypes. This is a very common pattern for harmonizing subtypes. You just be a little off and little kind of, not off, but like...
according to society standards.
Yeah, like 1 degree of separation from how everybody expects people to show up and behave.
Yeah.
But again, they're really good with tapping into individuals. They can analyze an individual, group, or situation to instantly understand what is secretly out of whack, which I think is really interesting. They're looking for all the things that are like off, right? What's out of alignment with this group of people or with this individual? That's what they're tracking for. And once they hone in on that, they almost work like a conductor to get that back into alignment. And so you could see this maybe even physically with an ENTJ that is a chiropractor, right? Like that's the physical body manifestation of it, which is like, oh, you're out of alignment. Let me figure that out and readjust you. But it's that concept taken to almost everything that they do.
Yeah.
Right?
We have multiple coaches that are in our profiler training program, learning how to do personality profiling to weave it in their coaching practice, who are ENTJs. And I would say, I bet a lot of the ENTJs that are inside the profiler training program are this style of harmonizing.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at people systems and they're looking at the person, almost as like the person was a company to go into and like ameliorate and make better. They're looking at that person like from a resource way, like I'm going to help you with your inner resources. Yeah. Your perspectives, all of this. This is a very attunement to the person and what's going on for them.
Yep, exactly. So some of the careers that they enter into are healing arts. It's not uncommon for ENTJs to end up as healers. Different styles of education, like alternative education in particular. They could even be a hypnotist or a shaman, right? This is the kind of style that they're looking at. And I would say when you get specific with their careers, they're usually okay with going outside the mainstream to seek education that is considered maybe like an ancient practice or something that is more aligned with, like disparate cultural traditions all brought together to make something new. And
we got approached by an ENTJ a few years ago to possibly come to South America or Central America to do an ayahuasca trip at their facility. He had made like millions in the tech industry and had started this commune, or not commune, but like this retreat center to take people on plant medicine experiences. And they wanted to come and bring our podcasting equipment and do like an expose. It didn't work out, but come and basically record on site at our experience and show that. And I think this person, the person that started it all, was probably an ENTJ, had ENTJ preferences. Probably this maybe not started out as a harmonizer, but leaned here over maturation of his career and life.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that person started as a dominant, but eventually found themselves as a harmonizing. And yes, like leading psychonaut experiences, like that ayahuasca concept.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And building a whole retreat center around allowing people to have these experiences. That's a great example of what a harmonizing ENTJ might look like. But they also might be a person who's like a Reiki practitioner or an acupuncturist, or as I mentioned before, somebody who does alignments and adjustments, as a chiropractor.
Yeah.
They could also be like a body-centered psychotherapist, right? They do, trauma release, and they focus in on the body to do so.
Yeah.
They could also be a life coach, right? A motivational speaker, a counselor, as I mentioned, alternative education practitioner. So these are the ENTJs that are not afraid of anything that looks a little woo-woo to the outside world. They're the ones who are like full throttle into it. And because of that, they get really good at what they do. They're very, very good at making these adjustments. In fact, Dario mentions they can almost achieve miraculous results. And I think it's that combination of ambition and that capacity to sort of problem solve, but bringing in all of these, other pieces of information that others might, sort of disregard. They're able to almost look like wizards in their specific area of expertise.
Let's go a layer deeper for type geeks. Warning label, type geeks, warning label. Let's talk about the neurotransmitter. Estrogen is the preferred neurotransmitter for harmonizing subtypes, all of them, and particularly ENTJ. The two cognitive functions, effectiveness and perspectives, extroverted thinking and introverted intuition. What are the attunements of these two functions for this subtype?
So this is the opposite of the dominant. And so therefore both their judging and perceiving function have a holistic preference. So both extroverted thinking or effectiveness and introverted intuition or perspectives are going to be more open framed, more receptive, seeing a bigger picture, more diffused energy. But at the same time, they're also getting things done because they're ENTJs. One of my favorite ways of describing them is that Dario mentions that they can be easily mistaken for some other type, right? That's very common for this kind of ENTJ to believe they're a different personality type. But one should not mistake their rapport building and aligning skills with anything less than a pragmatic power, hopefully to help others.
Yeah.
And so it's a holistic, harmonizing, diffused version, but there's still that pragmatic power in there. And that's what makes it so that they're not just, like you could see this like as the soft, cuddly ENTJ, but I don't think this is the soft, cuddly ENTJ. This is an ENTJ that has applied their cognition to solving human challenges that are locked inside the individual. And so they might be warm and friendly, but they're there to get a job done. And when I like the metaphor, the analogy of the chiropractor. It's like they might be super friendly, and then they get you on the table, and they're like they're moving your body all over the different ways and cracking it, and like it kind of sounds scary sometimes. You're like, everything all right? And then afterwards, you're sort of sore, but it feels good, and you're happy that it happened. Think of an ENTJ that is bringing that kind of energy to everything.
So it's important, as we've talked about these 4 subtypes, to remember that these are not your personality type. If you're an ENTJ listening, you're not a creative ENTJ. You are an ENTJ with creative preferences or creative tendencies or creative traits. It's not that you are this thing. It's not static, in other words.
Right.
One way I like to look at it is almost imagine a song written down on a musical sheet, the notes for a song. That's the ENTJ personality type. The performance of that song is the subtype. There's 4 performances of the ENTJ, and each of those have a little bit of a different flavoring, and that's the subtype we're talking about, meaning that it's not stuck, it's not static, it's nimble, it's flexible, it's dynamic. You can shift and flex and flow these expressions of your ENTJ nature throughout your life, throughout your career. And the next thing that's important to remember is that this will influence the career you choose. If you resonate, for example, with the harmonizing ENTJ, you might be attracted to a lot of the careers Antonia mentioned underneath the harmonizing category of the expression of the harmonizing ENTJ subtype. But you can also choose a career that's more in alignment with another subtype, and it will start to wire and move you toward having more of those inner characteristics. So your subtype can influence the career you choose, but the career you choose can also start to influence the subtype you show up with. It goes both ways. This gives us a lot of flexibility in our personality types, a lot of opportunity to pursue career paths that are both in alignment for us now, or ambitious career paths that help us wire ourselves and change ourselves to be in alignment with that career and express more of who we are. So, and then the other thing is through the maturation of life, it almost feels like the ideal would be that we could move and flow into all 4 of these expressions of our main type, depending on the context we find ourselves in. It may be harder, for example, when you're younger to flow into the harmonizing unless that's how you're naturally wired, but through maturity over time, you might be able to lean into more of those energies. So don't think this is static. It's dynamic. It gives tons of opportunity for your career path going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we wanted to make sure that we mention these subtypes, because on the top 10 list of best ENTJ careers, I'm sure shaman didn't, show up there. But for some, I mean, I'm not saying if you're harmonizing ENTJ, go become a shaman, but it's like there are valid careers that very much attract different styles of ENTJs that are never going to end up on those top 10 lists. So it's also just keep an open frame, keep an open mind, and then understand that you're looking for something that suits you. And as Joel mentioned, will also help you become the best version of yourself. What you choose is going to shape you. And so choose wisely.
Yeah. So what do you think? You're an ENTJ listening. You've been part of this conversation, but you haven't had a microphone. We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Stories are compressed experiences. So we get to see and hear about what you've actually experienced in your life, not just your opinion, but what you've actually experienced and what you've learned from that experience. So stories are so powerful because of that. Obviously, questions are welcome as well. And even if you're not an ENTJ, you're listening and you've got an ENTJ in your life, maybe you've got a story from your perspective around ENTJ career. We'd love to hear from you. Come over again to personalityhacker.com. Make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. You may be watching us on YouTube because this is a video podcast as well. You can go like, subscribe, and hit the bell to let you know when a new episode is out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And if you're trying to figure out whether or not you have ENTJ preferences, like did you think you were one before and you heard this episode and now you're reevaluating, or perhaps you didn't think you were an ENTJ and now you're starting to wonder, head over to personalityhacker.com and you can take our free online assessment to help you on your journey to finding your best fit type. And might we also recommend, if you do know you have ENTJ preferences, check out our ENTJ Owner's Manual. It is a deep dive into what all of this stuff means, what your cognition means, and the implications in your life. How does your cognition show up in every moment of your day? How does it show up when you are at your best? And how does it show up when it might be undermining you or sabotaging you? Our Owner's Manual gives you a really great deep dive into your own cognition. And we talk about things like your flow state and staying in flow. We talk about some of the loops your brain can get into. We talk about some of your fixations. And there's also a toolbox in there to ensure that you have exercises, actionable things that you can do in order to continue to be the best version of yourself. So head over to personalityhacker.com and grab a copy of the ENTJ Owner's Manual. Yeah,
and you're going to love this because unlike the podcast where we give ourselves a little bit more license to be freeform and bounce around a little bit more, you as an ENTJ, this is a linear teaching of the personality types. You get to go through it in a very logical, linear, progressive fashion. It's very well organized, which I think you would appreciate, specifically as an ENTJ for your personal growth path. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality, and then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.